Hello, and welcome to the, I believe, 49th RPG Book Club video. This one is on Chains of Gaelia, I believe it's pronounced, so that's just a guess. Dark fantasy RPG, which has some Souls-like, gothic, cosmic horror inspirations, if I recall. Yeah, I'd say it's the 49th, but I've definitely lost track at this point, so who knows. I've already sort of glanced at some of this, and one of the first things worth noting that this is, you can't quite tell, oh no, there we go, that this is a quick start guide, and yet it is up to 100 pages long, which I would qualify as not being a quick start guide at that point, but a lot of people do use that terminology where it's not necessarily applicable, so it's not an uncommon use of the term. The PDF is designed like a book, so you have to have it in double view to otherwise there's like weird indentation. Like here it looks fine, but if I went to single page, you end up with something like this, which is a little awkward, so it's probably best to have this one in two-page view. One thing is I'm not totally sure that the text is going to be visible without zooming in. This is maybe a little close to the end of the page right there. Before the first age began, when light, earth, space, and time still were naught but mere ideas out of the black void, Goith, he came. A supreme entity, creator of all that is true and all that is hidden, brought his will to our world. The primeval strode through the void and came to us. He found only formless, motionless matter and was repulsed. Gaelia. Is that Gaelia or Gaelia? Well, in any case, Gaelia, the land that still harbors us, was born out of his supreme will. Firstly, he molded matter to create soil so that he could tread it. Then came water so that he could wash his face. Then came the sun to warm his body, and lastly came time, the eternal judge of all there is, was, and will be. I'm a little curious whether this is supposed to be the unadulterated truth or more of a myth about the setting. The primeval came from a distant time in a distant land to remember his home across the void. He built a great city with great bronze spires. He lived alone in a silent home, where every street bore his name and every statue his features. We cannot know why the primeval left us, if it was by his own choice or if he was taken away. One day our Creator left the horrid void, Goith, from whence he never came back. That very night the primeval thought back to his beloved Gaelia, the land he created through his own blessed will, and so he cried and wept, thinking of all that it could have been and that destiny made impossible. He wept and tears rained down on Gaelia, flooding her with their desperate might, flooding her for years and years until, like a flower in spring, the world began to sprout. During the flood, in secret, the progeny had come to Gaelia, the 6 children of the Creator who decided to watch over the marvelous work of their father. 3 of them ruled from the abandoned city of brazen spires, and to prevent it from being demolished by the river of tears, they took it high up, close to the sun, climbing endless peaks to finally sit around their father's empty throne. So let's see. Because apparently the primeval is the creator of whoever us is, and yet that is not actually established within the myth itself per se. It's just our creator, but it is not known when he created these people. And later, the progeny, who were his 6 children, came and they were created outside of the land they came to, which is the setting, it sounds like, and it's not clear of whether they had a hand in the creation of the people, or whether that was something else still. And so he thought back to his beloved Gaelia. And yet, yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that's still sort of unclear because, he created Gaelia, but it sounds like he just created it because he disliked the void and he didn't really like the place he created and left. The place he liked was somewhere else he came from that he built a city to resemble. So it's not really clear if the thing is that his perspective has changed and now he decides he loves the land he created, or if the land he created is also named Gaelia after the place the primeval originally came from. It's fairly ambiguous there, and I'm not sure. It's in a way that adds mystery so much as is somewhat confusing. Okay, no, the land he created, so Gaelia is definitely the place he created. Okay, so it's not really clear if he disliked it after creating it. That's just sort of a feeling that I got. Yeah, because it's a separate home that he wants to remember, it seems like. And the being alone in silence and every statue just copies of him would seem to indicate not a place one would like, but that's just my perspective, perhaps. The primeval is really fond of images of himself, who knows? And so the very night he left, he thought back to it and wept, and despite him no longer being in the place, his tears still reached it. Which is also a little confusing, but it is what it is. Okay, now we're listing them. This is another bit of odd writing. Oh, never mind. So there are 6 of them, and then 3 of them actually spent time in the city. Rainulf the Knight, the Sword Hand, Weir the Dreamer who harbors secrets, and finally the Mother, Bringer of Light, Protector of Hope. After the flood subsided, a fragile mortal kin, made in the image of the good children, appeared on the earth. So the primeval is later, described as the creator, but they may have been created by his tears, and yet they're in the image of the progeny, which would sort of imply the progeny of the creators of, people. Man suffered and toiled to till the hard soil of Gaelia, made barren after the primeval's departure. Despite his pain, our weary hands were moved by hope, our one great strength. Hope is and always has been the only certainty in the troubled existence of our species, the only thing that renders us worthy of worshipping our lords. It is all we have left of our Creator. Mankind spread through Gaelia, and prayed to the good children as is fair and just. While the 3 heavenly lords watched benevolently from the lost city, the 3 siblings, malicious and evil, looked in the darkest depths of the earth below. Horrible creatures of unfathomable power, made of shadow and nightmare, began to invade the darkest corners of the realms of men. From the shade they whispered terrible secrets to our ears, driving us towards evil. This ordeal continued until one man, whose name has been lost to time, decided to turn his back on the light and lend his ear to his own shadow, which no longer was just a projection of his body before the candlelight of his desk, but a great black shape with countless rows of sharp teeth and a serpentine smile. That night, the thrice cursed heard 3 distinct voices, who whispered stories our minds should not be able to comprehend. And by dawn time his humanity was naught but a distant memory. He turned into the first beast, and Gaelia has never since been the same. This great betrayal released the true forms of the 3 cursed children of the primeval, namely the Grim Reaper, who appears to the dying all clad in black, Chur, Giant Father, who sleeps deep down below and dreams the threads of time, and the fate of every creature who lives or ever lived. Graku, the Mother of Shadows, Mistress of Darkness and Hunter of the Living, the dragon who resides in the darkest cave. I'm going to go back a bit to make sure, all of this seems alright. It is and has always been the only certainty in the troubled existence of our species. And yet it seems like there was significant worsening of the situation. So it's kind of curious to note that even before a lot of this, evil stuff happened, things were still bad enough that hope was the only constant, but there is reference to that in terms of the soil being deeply barren without the primeval. So it's just interesting to note that while there has always been hardships, it seems to have changed form. To this day, Gaelia is in turmoil. Hordes of beasts raid our villages time and time again, thirsty for our blood. So are these beasts also humans that have, so to speak, turned? In which case it's interesting that there can be hordes of them compared to the amount of normal people. It's also a question of whether any of these beasts actually end up dying, whether it's that there's a lot of people turning, or just some people turning, and then they very rarely pass on once they have. Children in the midst of horrible dreams wake with eyes blind and bloodshot. In the north, the seas boils and the maelstrom swirls faster than ever. Animals tear off their own limbs, driven by a mad and unnatural rage. Fathers slit their children's throats to spare them from a life of sorrow, and the hordes of shadows stagger hungrily towards men from every dark corner. The light of hope continues to fade, and nightmares develop more and more of what remains of our land of Gaelia. Who will save us from our fate? Who will shed light through the darkness? Will we ever manage to break our chains? And now we're seeing what the source of this is. So this is a sermon, which means it's definitely not necessarily an 100% trustworthy source. And it's from someone's memories, but adapted into a book or a grimoire. It's kind of unclear how that would happen per se, whether that's sort of a poetic way of saying that it was written down at some point, or it was somehow directly drawn from someone's memories by magic or some such. Yeah, it's interesting that it's the fathers slitting their children's throats to spare them, since the sort of classic version of that trope, I believe, is typically the mother. Alright, and here we are onto the index, which is more akin to a table of context, really, but this book is both in English and Italian, so I don't know if there's some language issues at play on that. Now, I have already looked ahead, and there is an introduction, but that is not listed in the index. I'm not really sure precisely why. Let's see, introduction. Yeah, I'm probably not going to be reading a lot of this, because I already read quite a bit of the lore, and I'm sure it's fairly solid. And in a 100-page document, I don't really want to focus too much on the general description of what a role-playing game is, but we'll see. Yeah, 10-sided die, a board divided into squares, so a grid. Two moons, and there's a red one. Okay. It is believed to be flat, and it is largely unexplored. Yeah, and so this does appear to be confirmed that all the beasts used to be human. It is a slow fall. Okay, and there's a process. You go from shadows to beasts, and it all involves tarot cards, which I remembered from the description of this game. I'm excited to see how that turns out. Ascension is the reverse of that. You go from being a person to an angel. Not sure if there's an intermediary like there is for shadows. Yeah, I know enough about Souls games to recognize a lot of these things as being similar to, stuff that's in them, such as the terms beasts and, picking up some sort of energy off of bodies, but I don't know enough to rightly call out what exactly those mechanics are called in those games. Okay, animate natural elements, reverse gravity, and distort time. And magic is the things that connect those energies, sometimes within or without humans. However, so Arcanium, Geist Flux, and Blood of the Primeval. Geist Flux is still being used, but it is now being abbreviated to Flux. Okay. So in a sense, it looks like there are no explicitly evil aligned cities or countries. Maybe there are some cities. Brings to these two pillars. Okay, so the major states all follow the cult of the White Progeny and are subject to the Council of 30. So I'm assuming this is a separate council that sort of, in a sense, rules over each of the countries rather than each country having their own council. Okay. Compassion, strength, and curiosity. Yeah, and none of them appear to be representative of hope there. Which is funny given that hope is claimed to be so important, and in the beginning, one of them, the mother, I think, was directly connected to hope. Especially since curiosity can be such a draw toward evil for many people. Interesting that the beyond, which I'm guessing is areas beyond the habitated areas, have a lot of statues of the mother. And this has given rise to people bringing more statues out in order to sort of give people hope and stuff. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's fun. And it's also worth noting that the mother is the most widely worshipped, probably. It's interesting that members of the Inquisition were the ones that were excommunicated for alternative thinking. That's usually the opposite of how it goes. Or at least I think it would be. I don't technically know that much about the history. Okay. Most enigmatic of the three brothers. Yeah, I don't know if that's another sort of translation thing, or it's supposed to be the other sort of white siblings, or if it is also referencing another brother that is one of the dark ones, or there's some sort of gender thing going on with the mother, but we'll see. Okay, that is perhaps in reference for the curiosity sometimes leading to, so to speak, sin thing I mentioned, where Weir is said to walk strange paths among the boundary between good and evil. That's interesting that his worship, or his cult perhaps, is banned in all of the cities, despite them in theory being dedicated to all three of the progeny. Okay, so he was sort of taken out of the faith entirely at one point, but that has been restored. It looks like, based on the stained glass being removed and then re-added. Oops. It's worth noting that a lot of this lore stuff is probably a bit more than it needs to be for a quick start guide, assuming that is still what this is intended to be. I'm just going back a bit because, based on the sort of gender thing with the other two white progeny being referred to as brothers, despite one of them being the mother, I'm curious if the same thing happened with the fathers slitting the throats of their children, and that was just supposed to be parent, and brothers was supposed to be siblings in this case, also because the black progeny are apparently all sons, unless that's another error. Let me see if it's ever confirmed if the mother is female. Yeah, daughter, she. So, just trying to get a handle on that, based on, the very least, the three brothers line. Ah. So this person is also a dreamer, it looks like. So, the giants may not have originally been humans, they're just described as large humanoids. But orcs are born of the most violent human criminals, which makes it seem like, yeah, the orcs are beasts. And so they come from humans, whereas the giants are humanoids rather than beasts, so they likely didn't used to be humans and then were corrupted. Yeah, and from the orcs come the ogres and trolls, and that sort of implies that beasts can reproduce, I would think. Which, sort of answers the question of why there are hordes of them, but is somewhat inconsistent with past descriptions of them always coming from transformed humans. Okay, nature fears death. And so the beasts that this one favors appear to be a group of people that, was sort of starving to death and started eating each other and spreading disease, and then became uh, almost undead creatures. Yeah, a lot of this seems to imply that the world used to have a higher population, and then various disasters sort of changed them into beasts. And that's what another reason there are so many beasts, especially the stuff with the statues already existing outside of populated areas and stuff, potentially. It's not clear what Nail's gender is from this, but assuming sons is not an error, we can assume it's male because of the evil sons. Oh, well, now we have another one referred to as mother, but referred to as a son in an earlier passage. Yeah. So Graku works through shadows. The first beast was influenced by shadows, and every person has to become a shadow in order to become the later forms of beasts. So it looks like all forms of transformation are initially through Graku. Okay, and once again, we have this one established as her when earlier she was called a son. Some of these beasts. She's the mother of most beasts, and so that sort of implies that snake men, basilisks, wyverns, and dragons are all beasts, also implying that they all were once human. At this point, now that I've taken a look at the gods, I'm probably going to skim the rest of this. It's interesting that they never appear near humans, and yet humans somehow have a record of them. So she does sometimes appear in the proximity of humans, just not often. Alright. So giants are demons. And this again implies that they at one point were beasts and thus at one point were people. This also does seem to confirm that beasts live for quite a long time. Though it's unclear whether, they can reproduce with each other and make more beasts that way, more demons. Led by a council of 30. Olympia or something. Yep. He is followed by hordes of warhounds and has heavily armored soldiers, and it's not sure if, the hounds are separate from the soldiers and are literal dogs, or the warhounds is just a name for the soldiers. Amusing that famine is the spreader of rot, while pestilence is the spreader of hunger. Sort of the opposite of what you would expect. So that definitely implies that the dragons, at least, were not originally human, but it's very hard to say. This one also implies that there may be sort of evil creatures that are separate from beasts. But who knows, maybe Thanatos and Ouroboros are also beasts that were turned by Graku, just of a different timing. Now, so far I've been liking all the lore stuff, but we are on to potentially more mechanically based things. That's nice art. Now that's very bare bones, but good for what it is. Let's see. Alright, I took a break for a minute. It looks like now we're moving on to sort of more mechanical related things. All the lore was pretty good, but once you get to mechanics, sometimes that's where things start to break down. I was starting off with classes and character creation, and yet the character is defined by their primary and secondary characteristics, which represent their physical and mental capabilities. Next, it is necessary to choose a class, which implies selecting the class comes second, and yet it is first in the book, which is sort of an odd choice. It's also worth noting that checks haven't even sort of been discussed or referenced yet, and generally, near the beginning, there's a basic idea about what a check is to sort of help someone understand how the game works and how, some basic class abilities which might involve checks. Now, there are class traits and universal traits. Interesting to see what form infallible rhetoric will take. Dex and Con. Sword and Pistol, which, fairly Bloodborne-esque, I suppose. Strength, let's see, yeah. It's usually Dex and Con, but you can go for a Strength build, it looks like. And you can go with Dex for Knight if you're dual wielding, but it's a more protection and support based class while still being heavy combat than Beast Hunter, as it looks like. Dex and Wit. Okay, Stealth and Lockpicking. But most of the other stuff that, describes a rogue appears to be combat related. Ah, yes, Wilp. I don't know what that one refers to. So, what? So far we've got 2 Con, 2 Wit, and 2 Dex, I think, represented. 1 Strength and 1 WLP. WLP and wit here too, so WLP twice, wit 3 times as being an important stat. Okay, madness. It's interesting that white mage is white mage, and then the one that uses black magic is a cultist instead of black mage, but maybe there's also a black mage. Now on to the actual classes, the actual full descriptions. Strength is only mentioned once as being important. I see 5 classes here. So we've got 2 magic-related classes, and a sort of hunter, a knight, and a rogue. Trying to think if there are any basic archetypes I would expect in this setting that are missing. Maybe not. Like, you could argue some sort of wilderness stuff, but I would guess the Beast Hunter covers that. Some are moved by divine wrath, others by a source of thirst for vengeance. You know, those 2 things do seem pretty similar. That's a fun sentence. Especially as a children's proverb. Okay. Purify the impure, which is you get a +1 bonus on rolls to hit piece. Alright, nothing huge, but +1 is better in a D10 system than a D20, based on how how checks work in this, which is basically the same as a D20 check, except with a D10. I already read ahead and looked at that, because I figured I might need to. Combat style. So these are bolded. Okay, so there's the class trait, and the initial traits you get are Purify the Impure and a combat style of the player's choice, but I think they also get Sword and Pistol automatically. It's hard to tell. Or maybe it's just, I don't really know how traits work yet, so I can't really say. It's just these ones are bolded and the others weren't, so I'm assuming they were the initial ones. Yeah, and you can take this multiple times, so it would be pointless to have this unless it was a default thing. Yeah, no, so far not seeing anything super good in the traits, or super things that would make this character seem super separate from another character. Just a few +1 bonuses, really. Ah, whoops. I mean, it changes if all the things are mentioned are things that get automatically right off the bat, except for maybe, say, the level 2 thing. Because a lot of minor differences about a character amount to a significantly different character, but if you're just selecting these minor things one at a time, there's not going to be a lot to differentiate one class from another. Okay. You're able to use light and heavy armor. That is their basic trait. And that is a thing that, assuming you can't get it easily other ways, could be a significant difference. Because, heavy armor, I'm guessing, can allow for the potential of more than +1 bonuses. But we'll see the other ways you're able to gain the use of armor. Okay, base Sword of Shield, dual wielding, and two-handed weapons. Yeah, I know. Nah, never mind. +1 to resist fear, +1 to intimidate. And that's very significant. And it's also worth noting that I didn't see very many wilderness-based skills on the Beast Hunter. I saw, some additional bonuses to tracking beasts, which sort of applies, but I feel is not, very widely applicable to the wilderness. Okay. That's fairly significant, I would say. Like, I'm seeing a lot of things that seem like they're more game-changing here for the knight than I did for the beast hunter. So I'm guessing, just a +1 against beasts could potentially apply, very often. But strength, bonuses, +2 strength bonuses outside of combat. And strength is basically one of the core stats. Walk across any kind of terrain without being interfered with, which, based on heavy armor probably messing with your movement a bit, that would be pretty significant. Because, it could effectively put you at the speed of other players in certain situations. This one is very significant. You can just survive once a day. That's very cool. And then the just able to use light and heavy armor might potentially be very significant depending on how easy that is to get. I should point out that in that vein, the most significant thing on the Beast Hunter might be just being able to choose any combat style you want, because that's something other classes don't really offer, and like the armor, there's a lot of potential to that, but you're probably only going to want to have like 2 combat styles of your choice at the most. This one also might be pretty significant just because, it's going to come up a lot probably, but it feels like any sort of weapon might end up doing the same. And for the most significant thing potentially about a class, it's fairly lackluster. Okay, I really do need to figure out how traits work to be sure, though. Sneak attack, single weapon, projectile weapons. Okay, 3 actions. Triple damage and stun. I'll have to figure out how worth 3 actions that is and how often it's likely to even apply based on other things, but the stun at least does seem very significant. Like, if, depending on how actions work, this isn't likely, but depending on how actions work, triple damage might not be that significant for costing 3 of them, but stun definitely would be. There's the question of how often you'll be up against an enemy who hasn't perceived you, but overall this does seem to be the most game-changing trait, the one that offers the most identity, and that is, of course, assuming that there are other ways in the game to be able to use armor. Okay, use single weapon combat style, projectile weapon combat style, dual wielding. So 3 potential combat styles to pick from. 1 you probably get automatically, let's see. Yeah. Master of Knives. That's fairly interesting. I'm guessing consecutive has to mean on the same turn. That basically means you get a free attack for 2 knife attacks, which is probably useful. Like, it's more interesting than some of the other +1, than some of the +1 bonus stuff, but it is potentially equivalent to it because it's got so many restrictions. And it doesn't seem that game-changing, but again, I'd have to know a ton more about how combat works and knives and stuff. I'm assuming knives do less damage than most other weapons, otherwise this would be pretty significant. Okay, bonus for stealing, which is nice. Bonus for moving stealthily and avoid being noticed. Succeed on a wit roll, you get a +1 bonus to your next wit roll. But you fail, but you lose stuff for failing. I don't really know if this stacks, like if the +1 bonus continues to build each time or not. That definitely needs to be specified, or you just keep getting a +1. Because, if you're reading it literally, I think it is you succeed, you get a +1 to the next roll. On that next roll, you succeed, so you get a +1 on your next roll, which just means a +1 each time. But, you could interpret it, and the ability would be more interesting if you, the next success you got a +2, and the next you got a +3. As it stands, I don't know if it's worth the cost of losing 1 SP every failure, when most +1 bonuses are pretty, without any consequence. Though that said, this is just any wit roll, which is a bit different, but you have to succeed in the first place. So this has like 2 relatively heavy restrictions for just probably a +1 bonus. Okay, more knife abilities. Up. Where am I? That's where I want it to be. Okay. Right, white mage. Right, and those rounds through. Fly blue toss on chance. Gaelia, those who are strong enough to harness them. White mage, enchanted dirt, white mage, enchanted dirt. Alright. So this, assuming there are not other ways to get white magic, is already very, very significant. Probably more significant than any other class trait, because it's a whole new set of abilities. And I'm sure the weapons each have their own set of abilities. So maybe that's as significant, but just without knowing the system, I would guess this is, very significant compared to some of the other things. And you also get a white karma on top of that. But, you know, it all depends on stuff I have yet to be seen, like if there's other ways to get white magic and how significant other traits are. Because it doesn't say you gain access to white magic traits, which are things themselves you would have to sort of spec into. It just says spells. So I don't know how much you get off from this right off the bat compared to weapon styles. Okay, so you can do this, which is sort of a whole ability, which the other traits for other classes haven't been so far. Like, without much knowledge of the system, I really have no idea what any of that means, though. +1 bonus on wit rules, and learn details about magic and magical creatures. To learn details about magic and magical creatures. Okay, that's fairly basic. Yeah, fairly basic. It's interesting, but fairly basic. Like, not in terms of a design standpoint, I mean, in terms of it does not offer you something vastly significant. Okay, that's kind of interesting. You can basically just pause, you know, a debuff to a stat for like to a specific stat for like a turn. That's interesting, but it doesn't seem like vastly significant. Doesn't seem like it's something that would be better than a +1 bonus. That's not a complaint, I'm just trying to track how good various abilities are versus each other. Okay, that's kind of cool, but once again, +1, so it's not game-changing. You earn a white karma card. You recover WLPSP. Okay, I don't know what that is. That's cool. Alright, so you can do a area of effect, but you have to divide the base damage of hitting a single target. Now let me try and reread this a bit to see if I can understand any of it. 1d10 plus stat, I'm guessing. And it deals your stat -1 damage. Which doesn't sound like a lot of damage, but I don't know how much damage other things do at this point. It's worth noting that there is no weapon here, so you could claim that the cost of getting access to white magic is that you do not have access to any weapons off the bat, but I don't know how easily that will be corrected with general traits or anything like that. So the class traits are the same as the initial traits. I don't really know the difference between class traits and initial traits either, really. Like, if class traits means something no one else can get, then that is pretty significant for the black and white mages. These are horrible beings that dwell in the void. May not really even relate to the sort of three black progeny, since they're, not necessarily tied to the void from what I've seen so far. Okay. Similar to white magic, this could very much be a lot, but then again, a black karma card could be a bit of a debuff. I'm not sure yet. Okay, same as the white magic, except it's occult instead of divine or whatever word they use for that. Okay, that's the same. Okay, similar. Ah, that's very cool. So does that mean, like, you can induce the madness effect on yourself, or does that just mean when a madness effect happens? Okay, same. 2 wit rules regarding deception, misdirection, and lying. This is the same. I honestly thought that you would get a different set of elements for the black mage versus the white mage, but I don't think that's the case. Yeah. 2 MP, you can hit all enemies in small cone. Yep, that's the same too. Alright. So I'm probably going to skip ahead to learning about traits, because I feel like I'm going to need to really understand any of the class stuff I just read. Alright, I'm back. I moved ahead to look at traits, to look at magic, and to look at combat styles, because you need to look at, well, combat styles and look at weapons, because you really need to look at all of those to have really an understanding of what's going on with classes. But basically, I was I was definitely right in a couple areas. So one of the more significant things you get from class is actually the combat style, because that opens a whole nother list of things that are honestly more relevant to what your character is actually going to be doing in combat than the rest of their traits generally are. I see there's light armor as a potential under beast hunter. I missed that. Anyway. So you get you would get, say, from your initial traits, this, you get a +1 to hit rolls on beasts, a combat style, and you can pick, for this class, you can pick from any of those combat styles. This, I am still not sure of the reason for, because you don't get it initially, but like, it's not listed as initial, but it's redundant because you can select whatever combat style you want multiple times. And it's also bolded. I don't really know why. Is that, like, the same for... You know, there are a lot of bolded things that aren't initial, so I don't know what the bolding is supposed to indicate, but... Still don't know why this is here at all, really. But basically, you get this. You get +1 to rolls to hit against beasts. You get a combat style of your choice, which doesn't actually do anything for you inherently. You don't need a combat style to be able to use the weapon tied to it. You can use anything, any weapon you want as any character. And the combat style, and knowing the combat style for weapon actually doesn't give you any benefits in that weapon inherently. It just gives you an access to a list of alternate traits that you can select with the traits you get from leveling up, or the starting traits when you are at level 1, as well as your class's initial traits. You also get 2 traits to select from any of the lists you have access to, including the combat style. These are not, like, vastly balanced, like Sword and Shield appears significantly better than a lot of the other trait lists for weapons. Uh, Dual wielding and sword and pistol both allow you to attack twice with one action at the sacrifice of some chance to hit. Two-handed weapons have sort of a buff in that most two-handed specific weapons deal more damage than other types. And so that sort of balances out maybe. But, like I said, the Sword and Shield trait list is a lot better than other trait lists, it seems like. And as well as, you not initially getting any bonuses to using a specific type of weapon for having the style for that weapon. Because, you can use the weapon for no matter what, and there's nothing inherently tied to the style other than the ability to access other options later down the line. Or rather, when you spend traits on it, because you can spend traits on it initially. But the real confusing part is it's not clear for a lot of these whether you actually need to make use of the weapon to gain the benefits from that weapon style. And on the one hand, that's kind of interesting, In the description here, it just says stuff from your weapon style are things that you learned from using that weapon. So I could see how that could apply to other weapons and how that could just be generally useful and give you a reason to pick up different weapon styles when you're effectively only going to be using, one weapon per battle probably, or one style per battle probably. That's just a guess. I don't really know the mechanics for that yet. But that also means that there's potentially no reason to use a weapon you have taken the style of ever, even if that's your only thing. Like, supposing it is accurate that, say, whatever, mirror polish, which allows a sort of blinding parry, or martyr are not things you need to actually have a sword and shield equipped to use. You could be a beast hunter, pick the sword and shield style for your initial combat style, put your trait points into martyr and defensive training. I think it's fairly clear that shield bass requires a shield, say. And then, never having actually picked up a sword and shield, just use your sword and pistol without having the style for it, and accessing these traits. And I think that does kind of create a dissonance. It's cool, potentially, that you're able to use techniques across styles for weapons that don't necessarily apply, based on the vagary of the language, but it is kind of concerning that it is easily possible for your weapon style to have no connection to the weapon you use, or what abilities you can get with that weapon. Alright, so just for now, say I picked, because I'm still trying to compare classes here, say I picked sword and pistol for my style as a beast hunter. I could get, we'll say, one trait from it and one other beast hunter trait. So I would have the ability to, going way back to class, I would get +1 to hit against beasts at all times, I would be able to deafen creatures with my pistol. And picking one more thing, I would be wearing light armor. So that's all I would get from that class right off the bat. Say I picked Knight instead, I would be able to use light and heavy armor. Similarly, I would have this combat style, and supposing I went with that instead of spending a trait to unlock one of the others, if I just went with this combat style, picked up one extra combat ability from that style, for now I won't bother to name it, and then let's see. I guess to an extent, the Knight having, I think, better abilities in a lot of ways than the Beast Hunter doesn't really matter at first level, because he can't really access those at first. So it's hard to directly compare classes, ignoring for now the magical classes, on what might be better or worse, because a lot of what's actually going to happen comes from the weapon styles that you're able to pick. But for now, I will say that being able to pick any combat style right off the bat without spending a trait on it is pretty nice. So I will say this, that sort of justifies the class a bit. So I'm not seeing necessarily Beast Hunter and Knight having a huge disparity like I thought they might. Like, I think later on the abilities get much more interesting for Knight, but starting off at least, it's very nice to be able to pick whatever weapon style you want. Rogue, let's see. This, which is a very interesting and unique class trait. And then what's the other thing you get? You get both single weapon and projectile weapons as a style, so that's pretty significant. So I'd say, off the bat, the physical classes aren't that unbalanced compared to each other, ignoring for now the need to look through every bit of what's offered by the weapon styles to figure that out. But the real main benefit of Beast Hunter seems to be the picking any combat style. And that's not technically the class trait. What it not being the class trait means is that it can be unlocked with the versatile trait, or rather, unlocked as a possibility of the versatile trait. But I don't really see that happening that often, because what that means is you'd have to spend one trait to get the select any combat style as an option for your character, select and use another trait to select a combat style, and then finally spend a third trait to actually get any ability from that combat style. So, like, if you want a variety of weapon-based things, you're probably going to go for Beast Hunter, and that's honestly going to be the main draw. A variety, or even just being able to pick a specific one, like, say, the straight firearm one is not available to any other class. But seeing as you get, +1 to hit against beasts and swords and pistols right off the bat for Beast Hunter, and then you can use the extra traits on things from actually the weapon style you pick rather than some of this stuff, which may not be as good as some of what the other classes have. For Knight, you can get light and heavy armor you have the ability to use off the bat, and you can pick stuff from and you get a weapon style. And I honestly think Sword and Shield is one of the better weapon styles looking at things. And then you've got like a couple extra skills to pick with your traits, but at level 1, you would probably be going just for Sword and Shield stuff for those traits. And then for Rogue, you get Sneak Attack right off the bat, which is a very interesting ability, and you get access to 2 weapon style lists without spending any traits. Then you get a couple other, things that you might want to pick rather than just weapon style traits, because they're kind of interesting, like that one. So I'd say the physical classes do kind of seem balanced. Like, just because it might sort of sound like Beast Hunter is really good from being able to pick your own combat style, it's still debatable whether traits from various weapons apply to other weapons, and like, you don't necessarily want that many combat styles, so being able to pick your first one isn't necessarily that much of a bonus when the other things that you would get from being a beast hunter don't seem really that unique, except the +1 rules against beasts. But basically I'm saying I think the physical classes all fairly balanced. To me, there's still some confusion over how weapon styles work, over how balanced they are against each other, but there's not really a huge problem with any of the physical classes, I don't think. And you can get things to feel pretty unique with the initial stuff you get and having 2 traits to spend. The issue, I would say, comes to the magic classes. Because as a magic class, you can still use whatever weapon you want. It would be hard to unlock a style for any weapon, but that doesn't in any way prevent you from using weapons, and some weapons have their own inherent benefits, like range, or being able to attack twice with one action. So you can use weapons as a mage, so that's not really a downside. The lack of access to a weapon style is, but that kind of gets invalidated by what you can get in return. If you don't want to use weapons at all, then that is not even a problem, because you get this, which, based on the stuff I looked at for damage, is more or less equivalent to any weapon damage. So there's not really a need to use weapons. And then, why these are so much better than the normal classes is that while you don't get, like, the weapon styles without spending points in versatile and stuff, which give you access to, for what the other classes is really their main class ability list, what you get for mages is spells. And as far as I can tell, you don't have to actually spend trait points to unlock spells. You just get access to all of these. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about traits here. And you get access to this whole list of special abilities without having to pay a single trait. Now, these abilities do cost MP, unlike, some of the abilities you might get from a combat style, but the sheer variety, being able to do things like heal allies that you could never do with a spell, and the fact that there's just a general... First of all, MP starting out is your main magic damage stat times 2 for how much MP you have, and most spells starting out just cost 1 MP. And then there is a general, trying to go back to the general traits. A general trait, stop it! well, maybe I just imagined this. Let's see, because I'm having a bit of trouble finding it now. Or maybe it was... No, okay, there we go. Your maximum MP increases by 2, which can be taken multiple times. So MP seems like it's quite possibly not even a problem. Like, in terms of being a downside of magic versus weapon abilities. Like, it's still a limiter, but does not compare to getting so many unique special abilities right off the bat with no cost of traits to unlock them. So the magic classes just seem vastly better than the, so to speak, physical classes. Because, like, the only thing the physical classes get over them is... Let me see if these guys get armor. Nope, these guys don't even have the ability to get armor, so armor isn't even a universal thing as a possibility above magic classes. But basically the only thing magic classes don't have access to, or don't have easy access to, because they can still get them, it just takes more work, is weapon styles. And instead they have spells, which are so dramatically better that it doesn't seem like it's even a contest. And to be fair, this is somewhat guesswork. I haven't played the game yet. I haven't read through the entirety of the spell list. I read a chunk of it, so I know some of those spells are pretty solid. But, it's to an extent guesswork, but the magical classes do seem vastly better without much of a downside. Then, moving on to just the other things to sum up class, you get a list of points that you can, or each time you level up and starting out, you get some traits that you can spend to get abilities, but most of these abilities, except some of the knights, basically, are not all that impressive besides the ones you get right off the bat at the start. And most of your traits you'll probably be spending on the combat styles that you are offered, but these combat styles, despite having weapons in their names, are not really tied to a weapon in any way. You can use whatever weapon you want, regardless of the styles that you have, and it may even be possible, the language is ambiguous, that you can use these styles of one weapon while using another. So that's just my sum up of class. Magic is probably better, and the main thing to focus on for physical classes are weapon styles, but, it's a little weird how weapon styles and their actual corresponding weapons interact. Like, part of the reason why magic people are so much better is that they can also use weapons if they want to, because the fact that it's hard for them to get a style doesn't really prevent them from using weapons at all, as far as I can tell. Alright, so that's sort of my thoughts on class. Looking at characteristics, I think I want to go back to traits just one more time to point out something that was a little odd. Yeah, a character can unlock a new trait from the trait list they have access to each time they level up. Which is also written here. Okay, I thought I read something that made it kind of ambiguous whether they got a new trait from their lists and a list specifically from the class trait, but I'm not seeing that language again now that I look, so I might have forgotten it. Or, sorry, misremembered it. Yeah, okay, so it looks like I thought it was maybe two traits each time you leveled up, but it looks like it's only one trait each time you level up, which progression is pretty slow, then probably too slow. And that favors, because, first level you get maybe around four traits, right? And then every level after that you just get one. That's a kind of a slog. And it favors magic users even more because I didn't show this, but as soon as you hit level 2, there are a whole new list of spells that you get access to. And to be fair, they cost a lot, but if you were spending your two extra traits you get at first level on extra MP, which as a magician I think you really should, that's not going to be hard for you at all. So, like, along with everything they get that other classes don't at level 1, mages also get additional things at level 2 and 3. So that is very unbalanced. The other classes seem fine. It's maybe a little unfortunate that most of what is special about them will probably come down to what weapon style you pick. But they seem relatively balanced against each other and do offer some interesting opportunities. I just think you should get more traits each level, because otherwise progression would be too slow for my preference. And things about how your character worked with would change, and you don't get a lot of things to play with at the beginning unless you are, again, one of the casting classes in which you get, like, vastly better things than everybody else. Alright, sorting out the class stuff took a bit longer than I thought, so I don't know how much longer I'll go for, but gonna look this over. Alright, so in this introductory document, the maximum level is 3. That's another thing that's worth noting. There might be a lot more interesting class traits as characters level up. Yeah, it is worth mentioning that how long it took me to figure out how classes really worked. It might be an indication that it'd be better to clean things up a bit and explain how things are list based at the very least, if not actually sort of restructure some of those lists and put them in an order that's closer to the actual classes. Yeah, health progression is also pretty slow. I start dying at negative HP. And movement actions. Looks like 1 meter per space, maybe. Interesting. Equal to their level. poor rogues. White mages and occultists, that's something that nerfs them a bit, but it is sort of curious that that is not in the description of the actual class. That is something that I think should definitely be there. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, so even though the 1/3, the level for attack bonus does affect their usefulness with weapons, which is a bit of a nerf to what I thought there were, it still doesn't affect their enchanted dart, which is probably what you'll mainly be using as a spellcaster anyway. Which, like I said, from what I looked at weapons, seemed mostly equivalent to most weapons, but maybe I'll find out I'm wrong with it on that. Potentially better, actually, because I think most ranged weapons you actually have to reload in this game for an action. But the enchanted darts are just one action, no reload, it looks like. So it might actually be better than most ranged weapons. And like I said, it's not, I don't think, affected by the downgrade in AB. Okay, what? Attack bonus. Okay. And actually, I'd have to figure out what LIV is, but willpower level, okay. Yeah, it goes straight to level circumventing AB as long as they're using the enchanted dart. What was I looking at? It looks like there's 3 physical stats, 2 mental stats. I wasn't really paying too much at the difference between them. Okay. Yeah, like all of this stuff I would want to be inside of the actual class. And I wouldn't have expected it since there's already differences in the armor they can get. If a knight and beast turn passive discord is equivalent to a half level plus con, a half level plus dex, a half level plus wit, and okay, this one isn't even a downgrade for the for those classes. It's just manipulates what stat it is. For every 3 levels, they must increase. They increase by WLP points. Okay, this is the same as life, basically, I think. Huh. It's interesting, because if you lose sanity completely 3 times, it's just over. There's no possibility of recovery, it looks like. And that really affects this one. Because, yeah, that's a huge bonus, but if you ever get a temporary madness effect, it's 3 strikes and you're dead completely. Okay, level plus dex plus wit for dexterity. I think I'm putting on a fan. Hopefully that doesn't mess with audio too much. And karma, this is one of the things I was interested in. After this, I'll probably start skimming. Okay. white. For example, a character with 2 black karma cards who commits a good deed. Okay, for a second, I was confused about that example, but now I got it. 3. Okay, overload. The fool. Huh. Okay, 4 cards. Yeah, Ascension I thought was mostly, something that happened to people that were being transformed by good stuff. So it's weird that you could get it off of, black karma cards, but maybe since it's from the corresponding card, then you wouldn't be able to get the Lucky Tarot, but I would assume the Lucky Tarot is personal. And I don't know if I'm right about what the term Ascension meant. Okay, choose a Lucky Tarot. Okay, cycles an era to 10 years and is named after one of the cards. The Fool is not used. Tradition reflects older tradition widespread in the central empire. Figures are considered benevolent symbols, practicalities acceptable, which I'm telling you is deeply rooted. Okay, choose a tarot card. Yeah, best represents you or your character. That's an interesting choice, or randomly draw it. Yes, getting close to your heart and treat it with respect. Oh, that's cool. These are some pretty significant bonuses. It would be an interesting thing to make your tarot card completely at odds with what someone would expect your character to be, though. Yeah, with some of these in class bonuses, you can get up to like a +3 stuff involving intimidation and things. Ooh, that's nice. Though, of course, if you can't normally detect that, that does lend itself to the question of how do the mage abilities that involve getting bonuses to convincing people with certain karma cards actually work if the player doesn't know when they're getting the bonus. Okay. +1 to initiative. I guess that some of these could sort of be considered backgrounds as well, in a sense. Like the priestess or the hermit. Like the hermit wouldn't have to be, but it's a title that could be a background, and then the priestess actively says that the character is well educated, which is sort of a background thing. Fortune, +1 to initiative, +2 to strength outside of combat. Okay. This is a fun one. +2 to sanity. That's very nice. I mean, realistically, probably not as good as some of the other ones, but fun. They can take a trait from another class's trait list and add it to their own list of traits. Okay, so that doesn't mean they automatically get that trait. They just have the opportunity to select it, which is nice. Because they can, they don't have to spend one of their trait points on it at first level, even though they're picking it first level. They can decide to actually spend on it later. Very nice. Also nice. Okay. That's fun. Alright. I'm still not sure about the tarot cards. And like the ascension stuff. I'll have to check back on it later. I'm going to skim this to make sure I know what I'm talking about with these, because I already read it, but maybe I didn't read it properly. Okay, so I was talking about survival stuff possibly being tied to a class earlier, but looks like that's covered under general. Yeah, steady hands has surrounded as a prerequisite. That's what the grayed out in parentheses means. Can increase max HP, that's nice. Not sure why that's there, but it's a nice picture and fine reading. 3 actions, you can really book it. I mean, it's only effectively one more action of movement, but I'm just trying to see if there's a equivalent. You use strength instead of dex on your roll to hit on damage or any dex traits based on it. It's kind of funny that that's there, but there doesn't seem to be a equivalent for strength to dexterity as there is dex to strength. Okay, weapon styles, which I already saw, but I just want to give it a quick look, see if I missed anything. Okay. So like I said, this one seemed pretty good. Like, there are a lot of abilities like this one, so that's not that special, but basically debuff to your attack to get a buff to parrying stuff. Now, this one is cool, because you can parry in place of allies, and it works either way. Because if it fails, you still suffer the damage instead, succeeding the allies unharmed, so ignoring the test for a second, you can just take away damage from an ally that is adjacent. You might receive it instead, but whether you succeed or fail, you prevent the damage from reaching them. So that's a very good ability. And it also gives you a white karma card just for acquiring it, so very significant. You can just stun people if you beat them in a test for one action. You can taunt someone for their next 2 attacks if you succeed. Like, there's a lot of really good abilities here, and some other lists have similar stuff, but like none quite as many. Like, you can blind someone with a parry if you get a 10. You can just move straight towards someone. I guess terrorized is a special thing, but you can move straight towards someone who's attacking an ally, which is pretty good. You can knock people prone on a charge. Like, a lot of really good abilities there. And some other things have nice abilities too, but not as good ones as high a concentration, I think. Yeah, penetration 1, but I don't really know what that is, so I can't really judge it. If you hit 2 attacks, you get +1 on one more attack that is not free. Like, just if you have the opportunity to do another attack after that, you get a +1 bonus once. So, like, that's not super significant at all. You, opponent gets -1 against you for 1 round if you succeeded a text and use a different ability, and for a total of like 2 traits to fully unlock that, that's not that significant either. But that's kind of nice. So I misread that at first. I don't think I realized that that was automatic the last time I was here. Like, that's pretty good. Yeah, +2 initiative. A lot of various weapons have stuff like this. Yeah, this is like the opposite of the other thing. You can have a higher chance to hit, but you have a debuff on defense. That's actually probably better because, you're not always going to take a defensive action, but you're pretty much guaranteed to attack. So you could say that's a bit better. +1 on parry reactions, like, very little here seems as significant as that list. And to be fair, for dual wielding, you get the base ability of the double attack, so that does kind of shift things. It makes a lot of stuff really hard to compare. This list seemed pretty lackluster. Like, you get some bonuses on breaking objects. You get taunt, but Sword and Shield has that. You get an extra 2 meters when charging specifically. Like, you get an extra attack if you kill someone, but only once, and it's with a -2. So, like, not a lot on here seems that significant compared to some of the other stuff, but like the dual wielding, there's kind of a buff, and that exclusively two-handed weapons tend to do more damage, so it makes things difficult to compare when all the bonuses are sort of scattered across different sources. Right, now, I don't think there was any bonus to using a single weapon, and I don't think its list was nearly as interesting as the Sword and Shield, so this might be one of the worst ones. +1 bonus on rolls to hit and dodge reactions against opponent of your choice. Challenge. -2 on rolls to hit and dodge all other enemies involved in the fight. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, you'd have to have actually challenged them, but you can... Like, that could be very significant. Like, if you wanted to spend all your challenges a turn doing that, that would be boring, but it would really change the game. So yeah, I guess a single weapon might have a lot of significant stuff too, but it's hard to turn. A little bit of extra movement. +2 initiative, like the other thing before. Yeah, same as dual wielding. Bit more damage on challenge, which is nice, but you have to be level 3 to access it. Okay, less vulnerable to opportunity. Decrease reloading actions, so some of these seem almost necessary to choosing to use a ranged weapon, but definitely significant abilities. That's pretty cool. Also pretty cool. Very cool. So, you get a lot significant from that, but some of it's kind of necessary to get over the flaws in the first place. This should have Booming Spark as a prerequisite, but it doesn't. Yeah, this one doesn't seem that different from normal range weapons. A couple differences in conditions. Okay, Booming Spark. I don't know if you can do ranged attacks with your pistol if you have a sword and pistol. I would assume so, I guess. Let me go back to sword and pistol just to check that. That cause opportunity when they shoot or reload a pistol. So that seems like a very good style, potentially, because you can use ranged and melee without opportunity and stuff, I think. I couldn't really tell whether, like, what using the pistol normally is like outside of the double attack you get from that. But single weapon might be, like, the weakest overall choice, because the weapon itself doesn't lend many benefits. And the style isn't vastly game-changing either. But it is cool. Okay, ability checks. I'm going to have to glance at this, but... Okay. Okay, yeah, I've seen that before. It's completely disconnected from the rest of what is in this paragraph, it seems like, so that was a little confusing. Oh, sorry. Okay. It's nice that they sort of tell you how the setting expects you to handle rules to an extent. Another nice bit of setting info. And on to Karma. Alright, let me move on a bit. I'm gonna come back to this, but I want to see how much more I've really got. Combat, I probably have to read, just to get an idea of the sort of things a character can do. Spells, I more or less looked at. I'm definitely not going through all of those. Equipment, probably glancing at the weapons a bit, but not long. Okay, and I'll probably go over bestiary a little. Right. This is all a rehash, I think. Full catastrophic metamorphosis, ascension, temporary madness. I appreciate all that info. Okay. Catastrophic metamorphosis. Turns into a beast. It's interesting that they don't turn into a shadow first. That seemed to be an intermediary step. Or maybe the type of beast is generally a shadow or something. Okay, character counts as dead. I do think it would be potentially more interesting for it to not, be death necessarily, and to offer some benefits as well as disadvantages, but that's just the kind of thing I like. And maybe Ascension will be that. Okay, cool. Like, you could claim that, this is it's unfortunate how much worse this is than this, but that's kind of a matter of perspective. Like, this is obviously worse for the party, but for the character, even though they count as dead, if they do manage to kill or escape the party, that character is in some sense still alive. So for them as an individual, it's better than this, which is just definitive death. Now, Ascension. Cool. Oh. Okay. Yeah, so it gets. So there's really a lot more negative than benefits here, but it is still kind of a cool bonus state. The question is, I think, how recognizable it would be. For one thing, how recognizable it would be to random NPCs and how much of a stigma there would be about it would really affect how much of a negative thing this is, and also, for something like this that is so unique and unlikely and sort of miraculous in a sense, I generally prefer the abilities or advantages and disadvantages conferred to be a little more unique than involving numerical bonuses. But that's personally just me. I'd like there to be some effect or some other thing, even if it was passive, that was beyond numerical things. Whoops. Now, obviously, that's something that if I was GMing, I could just construct myself, but I prefer an existing framework. Like something like this. Additionally, they are able to see the karma of people and the body of incorporeal creatures such as spirits and specters. Like, to be fair, you could also claim that, the physical changes in appearance for the black karma ascension are the same of that, but that doesn't really confer any explicit benefits or even disadvantages technically. Like, I would like some sort of effect for these physical changes other than just cosmetic for them to be significant to me. In addition, they sprout 2 angelic wings and thus are able to fly at their movement speed. Yeah, this changes way more about your character than this does, it seems like. Okay, shuffle back of the deck. 3 white common cards in case there is an additional overload. Temporary Madness, Catastrophic Metamorphosis. Okay. So I think the Angelic Ascension is a bit cooler than the Demonic Ascension, or whatever it's called. Controlled Psychosis. But conceptually, they're both very interesting, and I'm glad this system exists. Okay. Temporary Madness. 1d10 hours. They only get since, like, this is again maybe just a personal thing, but since you only get 3 of these before you just die, I would personally prefer SP to fill back up, and that may seem counterintuitive, but also having some sort of change in perception and behavior that is temporary can also relieve a lot of stress and put things in perspective and such in a way that honestly would make sense for the senses to potentially be higher after recovery. And I'm hoping maybe to speed through the rest of this, but let's see. Squares being on each side. So another 6 spells. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of things I've seen so far seem similar to Pathfinder, that in particular, but I'm not seeing one of the main things, which is decreased chance of hit for each consecutive attack action yet, but we'll see if that comes up. Three activations. Rest of the round is reactions. Interesting, very interesting. If an ability used by a character or condition has an extended duration, the round count is done at the beginning of their turn. Okay, I think I get it. For example, if, someone has -2 to something for a round, that doesn't mean until the current round is over. It means until it has been, like, a full round of turns and gets back to them. Movement. Movement rules described above. So I'm guessing there's no movement splitting, but it's hard to say. I've felt that way just looking through the Pathfinder rules too, though. Anyway. Attack. I've looked at this before. The critical failure does a lot, and the critical success only deals 1 bonus damage. But some other effects can change that, apparently. That's kind of cool. Unbalanced for 1 round means attacks against you have +1, or defensive parries have -1 or both, or something like that. I can't quite remember. Okay. Right, nothing about how many activations switching weapons takes. Which is important to have, probably. Okay. Cool that a shield has that benefits. Another reason why the weapon and shield style is pretty good. Firearms and enchanted darts can't be parried, though. Yeah, it says if you're using a shield, you can also parry attacks made by projectile weapons, but can you parry a melee weapon with a shield? It doesn't look like it. So, in theory, right, the ability to use opportunity attacks at range as allowed by that 1 ranged attack skill tree is very useful. In most systems it would be, because that's like an extra attack. But when a normal attack and attack of opportunity effectively use the same resource, which is, because it's an activation either way, which takes, you have to either use them as an action or save them up. You're not necessarily gaining anything by taking a ranged attack of opportunity, because you could have always made that attack because you have range, pretty much. And that's not guaranteed, there are circumstances that interfere with it, but it's like a level 3 trait requirement, so you'd think it'd be more significant. The same kind of goes for all opportunity attacks. They're just less useful in this system than in other systems, because you have to save up for them. On the other hand, though, like, that saving up allows for ambiguity. Like, in addition to maybe not being able to attack someone, and then being able to at a time when you also happen to have opportunity and wanting to save up for that. There's also that if you were saving up for a defensive option, but realize you don't need to use it, then you could use it for an attack of opportunity instead if opportunity presents itself. So, like, it's not like attacks of opportunity are useless, but they are significantly less useful than they are in some other systems. Because you have to give up an attack to have the ability to make that attack in the first place. Take cover. Alright, conditions. I don't really care enough to read these, but I am kind of curious about some of them. Okay, stunned means 2 of your actions. That's nice. You lose 2 of your actions. It's good that it doesn't, like, tap you completely. Otherwise, that one stunning attack would be pretty intense. But that does bring up the question of whether stunning someone can stack, and you can stun someone multiple times for multiple sets of 2 actions taken away. I'd assume no, but I don't know if that's specified. Okay, and shaken is just less good stunned. Bleeding. Okay, bleeding X. So that sort of technically tells you, because bleeding has an X value, but stunned does not. You thereby know it doesn't really stack. And that's all for now on that, I think. Okay. Penetration. Okay, penetration is about what I figured, lets you ignore armor. That's pretty cool. The quick dual wield interaction. That might make knives particularly useful when the other benefits they confer to rogues, and I'm guessing they're quick. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going back quickly because I think I sort of zoned out at the end. Oh yeah, dying I do need to look at. Very interesting, because healing does wake you up, but it has to be more than the negative you're in. And the way to stop that negative continuously decreasing without healing is fairly complicated. Yeah. I would maybe suggest having this down to 1 action, because it doesn't even make them less unconscious, it just stops them going further negative, and they can still be attacked to go further negative. So 2 actions is maybe a bit much for this, but that might be down to preference. Yeah, it doesn't really say what delivering the killing blow constitutes, but I'm going to assume it just adds more negative HP. Okay, on the threshold of death, I'll have to see what that means. Now we are on spells, which I'm not looking through all of.
Equipment, starting equipment, I should know. Maximum of 2 weapons. 1 suit of armor if the character uses one, and 75 coins. So that's kind of interesting, because it doesn't have any limit on the cost of the armor or weapons. And it doesn't really say anything about shields, whether those constitute weapons or armor in this case. But I would assume you can sort of count it as a weapon, since it's part of a weapon style most of the time. Not looking at most of these. I do want to glance at damage, though. Yeah, there isn't any inherent benefit to keeping the other hand free, and single-handed weapons tend not to have much benefit other than the ability to use them two-handed for less damage than you would, a true two-handed weapon. It's too lightweight fast. Huh. Give me a second, I may have missed something. Okay. Oh, light is just this weapon cannot be wielded with 2 hands. Quick is something else. And that is, I'm assuming that is what fast is supposed to be. But yes, a knife has the benefit of fast. So despite having more of a damage disadvantage, you can attack with it more frequently. And then it confers a bunch of benefits to rogues. Yeah, so based on what I've read about weapons before, it really should be the two-handed weapon combat style can be used with two-handed weapons. Not two-handed weapons can be used with the two-handed weapon style. But thinking about it more closely, while the way they're talking about using different styles of combat with different weapons, it does kind of imply that, you can only use a corresponding weapon style's abilities while using that kind of weapon. But, it's not explicit yet, still. Okay, we're on 68. I want to go back a bit again just to sort of re-emphasize something. Yeah, any character in Gaelia can wield and use any weapon. So you, in theory, don't need a style for a weapon, even though it says you can use certain weapons with certain styles, as if the style would allow the use of the weapon, rather than the other way around. Right, I wanted to look at firearms. Yeah. Generally more powerful. Okay. Yeah, there's a cone. Looks like there's a set damage for firearms, too. That's very interesting. And they have a lot of special skills. Yeah, it looks like some of the normal projectile weapons do too. And these have 0 actions for reload. That's good to know. Looks like it's only the heavy crossbow that requires a reload action, and you can put that down a bit by getting a specific style. Looks like there's a lot of potential for damage with ranged weapons, more than I expect, except for maybe firearms. Okay, speed is reduced when wearing armor. Okay, and stealth and athleticism is reduced. Okay, no continuous damage, that makes sense. And there's only 2 kinds of armor. Okay, less athletics, stealth, and speed, but you get -2 on every attack in terms of damage, potentially, so armor does seem like it can be very, very good. So that is a useful class skill for the knight to have. Okay, and there are, you know, parry bonuses that apply even to melee. That's something I wanted to check, so that's good to know. Alright. And it looks like shields work sort of like traditional armor class in that they increase your passive defense, which is sort of like what armor class is in D&D, whereas armor just decreases the amount of damage you receive. Alright, so pretty much the last thing is bestiary. I'm not going to look at the... what do you call it? I'm not going to look at the sample adventure thing. One monster of the same level per character. I don't fully know what that means. Maybe that means like 4 adventurers who are level 2, 4 monsters who are level 2, or you add all the levels, or 1 per... I mean, I guess if you add, it kind of comes to the same thing, but I'm not totally clear on it. Now that I think about it, activations do help with level progression. Yeah, so it sounds like all beasts, even the demons and dragons and stuff, might be human originally. Yeah, I'm not reading too much of this because I'm a little, been at it for a while. A bit tired. But I do want to get a general idea of what monsters are like. Very interesting, art-wise. Okay, and where's its level? Level 1, so it should have 3 activations. Not a lot of health, not a lot of MP. Negative karma, which makes sense. Yeah, and player characters are like already above 10 HP at this point. Strength, dex. Not much to stats. they can take away sanity. Nice.
When you have like set strength for these, it might be better to just do the calculations already. Oops, wanted to read the description. Move on a bit. Dark Prayer, Chilling Scream. Alright. Yeah, I'm liking all these so far, but I'm moving on for a bit. Okay, we're getting to level 2. Doctrine teaches us that the pious man feels no hope. That seems at odds with things I've heard before, and this is a boss. What's PD? Passive defense, right? This one would be pretty tough, it looks like. Dark Prayer again. And then... Ooh. That's very cool. Yeah, I'm not looking at much more of this, but I do like the bestiary so far. Yeah, we're only going up to level 3 here, so that might be too much for any form of giant other than orc. So we've got the undead, we've got the giants, next will be the dragons or lizard people, maybe. I did want to look at some of this, but dragons might be a little too high level for this. Hunger. Yeah, since the hunger is sort of a universal trait for the undead, I might make it... Yeah, it shouldn't be whenever it kills a creature. It should probably be that they can do it once on any corpse, so they can feed on their dead allies, because that would fit the theme and also allow them to use the ability more often. If it's, just against people they directly kill, that would either have to be PCs, which wouldn't happen too often, or to showcase the ability, the master would have to make sure there are always NPCs nearby and fights against them. On the other hand, it doesn't look like a specter has hunger, and I think it's still part of the undead, basically. And a giant rat. Fiends. What's the difference between a fiend and a demon? Oh, so these are like proto-beasts, maybe. It's very nice. And yeah, I'm not reading this, at least for this video. I might read it later for fun, but that's it for now. Overall, I think the setting is very, very good here. I think the bestiary is cool. I think combat is fine. You know, it's Pathfinder adjacent. It seems like it'd make sense. I don't know if damage matches damage resistance of enemies or anything like that, but that's all easy to tweak. The one thing I'm not really sure about, though, in a sense you could say it's the main aspect of the system, is character creation. And I think bits of it are good. I think the weapons all provide interesting advantages and disadvantages as well as their style. And I think some, at least, of the class traits are cool, but I would want class traits to be a bit more significant, it to be a little more obvious how you go from class abilities to weapon styles, because those are very, very important to classes. Maybe a couple more non-passive, non-combat relevant class traits for each of them, since, you know, most of the combat stuff is going to be in the weapon style anyway. Probably more traits every level, just at least if you're not buffing traits, just to make progression more interesting. And then for these guys, I think you probably, like, I can't say 100% for certain, but they do seem very, very significantly more powerful than the other classes. I guess now that I know more about how karma works, there is not really much benefit to having karma, which I might change, like, if I were you, because I think, at least in terms of how other characters react to you, it having more of a potential benefit would be cool. But, like, you can consider having karma at all a debuff, so that's something that sort of goes against the classes, but overall, I think the magic classes are significantly better than the non-magic classes, and that should probably be changed. I need to look up when you get activations, because that's a huge element of progression. Yeah, okay, so that's another thing, the karma system. I think the karma system is very cool in all its aspects, and the tarot stuff. I think, like I said, with the full transformations from karma, for the evil one at least, I'd like to see something a bit more dramatic, but that's not a huge deal. I think the madness stuff is good. My computer stopped screen recording randomly because I filled up on stuff, so I'll try to make this quick. Like I said, most stuff seems good. I am sort of struggling to sort of just, like, it kind of feels like there might be something missing, but I don't know what it is. Because you've got, the setting, which is cool. You've got character creation, which, I think works overall. Maybe probably could be tweaked a bit, but it's at the very least workable. You've got the karma system, which is nice. You've got the bestiary, which is also nice. But I'm trying to. It feels like that those are like the main highlights of what the system is, and it feels like there should be something else. Maybe it's just that there's never been anything that's talked about interacting with characters or the environment really at all. Like, it's kind of hard to know what a session of this would look like per se. I don't really get a overall understanding of that, I feel like, just from the mechanics that I've learned. On the other hand, this is in theory a quick start, so that kind of makes sense.